Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Today's EVE Talk is coming from a JITA under siege because the Imperium has sent their best and finest to JITA to burn it to the ground. It is burned JITA apparently this weekend, and so we may have some like spots of tie-dye and things like that if ganks happen to happen outside. I'm not even sure if on the interior of a station you get that same effect or not, but we will see how it works out, of course. And let's see what the impact on the market will be. I'm mostly interested, I think, in the destroyers this week as the extra product. But as always, let's take a quick look at the New Eden store and see what's happening here. Unfortunately, I would say nothing new. We still have the fireworks, we still have the Eros Blossom skins, but other than that, we're not seeing anything on sales or anything like that. So yeah, I would say not the week where I'm gonna buy anything from the New Eden store. Let us move then to the market. That's why we are here, of course, and we are going to start with some plex and stuff at 1 minute 15. Like that. As always, we'll start with plex, and well, a little bit of a bump up, at least in JITA. 3,750,000 ISK in JITA 4.4. Outside of JITA, pretty much the same price. That is kind of weird. Zero margin pretty much between the sellers in JITA and the sellers in the player owned trade hubs. You can also see that it's basically not that much here, and not that much is available here anymore, which is kind of weird. But if we look at the price history, we've got a little bit of hesitation right here, a bit of increased volume. So that was the small 10% sale from CCP that stalled the increase in price. I thought that perhaps it would be the start of the decline, but no, we get a nice little bump up back to a 1-year high point, which is where we're at right now. 3,750,000 ISK for the sellers, and the buyers are coming in at 3.7 million as well. So very narrow margins, lots of demand apparently for plex, and a great time to sell in my opinion. Next up, we have the multiple pilot train certificates flattening out at the high point of 1.75 billion ISK on the chart. You can see the volumes decreasing at these prices. Not that many people are willing to go for these trading certificates. I think this is also normal. This is an item that is very much preferred by people that have skill point farms, because of course it allows them to train multiple characters on the same account. But when they're this expensive, there's just not that much interest. Almost 1.8 billion though for the sellers, and the difference with plex, of course, is the margin here. Buyers are coming in at 1.6 billion, a little bit above that. So that's definitely a major difference, but sellers trying to sell these trading certificates at 1.8 billion would be a great time to sell, of course, especially if you manage to buy at the right time, let's say below a billion ISK over the course of the last year. But as I just told you guys, with these volumes, like less than 100 a day, it's not gonna be easy to get the best price. Personally, I would take a more competitive price, try to undercut quite seriously, but still have a nice profit, of course, and try to sell that way. But otherwise, it's not gonna be easy. The skill extractors next, showing a bit better the increased price after the decrease from CCP sales. So I don't think that the skill extractors themselves were on sale, but they are so closely correlated to plex that we can see that same motion here as well. So a little bit of a dent because of the CCP sale, but then we are back on the increase. Currently selling for 421 million ISK, buyers coming in at 416 million ISK, also 1-year high point, very expensive at the moment. This is then also reflected normally in the large scale injectors, and it is, you can clearly tell now on these that we are at a 1-year high point. 890 million ISK for the large scale injector. On the chart, they're actually selling for 894 million, buyers coming in at 869 million ISK. Next up, we have the small scale injectors. Same pattern again. Nice little bump in the last couple of weeks, bring us to more than 180 million ISK on the chart. Volumes do decrease a little bit, I think, especially in the large scale injectors. You can see that in the last couple of days, volumes are going back down a little bit. So there is some hesitation to keep buying. I do think that this will also be a sign of us reaching an actual top here. And here for the small scale injectors, they're now selling for 180 million ISK, buyers coming in at 173, but also another sign of those decreasing volumes. You can see that the demand doesn't remain eternally available at these higher prices. At some point something is going to have to give, but the volumes for Plex are still doing decently well compared to the rest of the year, so calling that top will not be very easy. But yeah, as I was saying, especially here for the multiple buyer trading certificate, that's really a sign that the market is not willing to go that much higher anymore, to pour that much more ISK into these items anymore. And as a result, I think that this is like the first sign that tops may be reached very soon, I think. Finally, we still have the daily alpha injector that is just taking off and also reaching that 1 year high point. Potentially we could have a final little spurt here because of burn Jita, of course. If you want to get a ganking alt for the Courser, which is what I've seen the Imperium use mostly, then it's of course pretty handy to just start a fresh character, put in some injectors and even some daily alpha injectors to get the most out of that and get to your skill points efficiently. 67 million now for the sellers, 62.5 million for the buyers, and that was a nice trade to be made over the course of around 3 months, from 40 to 67 million. That is not a bad profit margin to take, of course. Ideal time, I would say, to sell for all those that have been patient over the last year and that have made the right investments at the right time in this category. You're looking at some nice profits. But as I've said, one thing to keep in mind, volumes decreasing, and as a result it's going to be a bit trickier to sell at the best price right now. Next up we have the minerals coming in at 650. Like that. And for titanium, of course, we'll start with the smallest one. We are basically flat at 4.5 ISK here, which is not a great price, but 443 for the sellers and then 440 for the buyers. And I should actually put up the Jita price, which is at 454, just above 4.5 ISK. But the bad news remains the amount that is still being brought to the market, 2 billion, and you can see several sell orders in that range. It still puts more pressure on the price. Actually, we should be very happy with titanium managing to hold on to a price of 4.5 ISK and even going up 2 cents over the last week or so. Will burn Jita have an impact on this? Perhaps. They are killing lots of raiders, and people that are not aware of what's happening may still be moving minerals in with freighters at the moment. But personally, I think that they're going to go for high value targets rather than a freighter full of titanium or Veldspar or something like that at the moment. So I don't think we'll see that much of an impact from burn Jita on the mineral market myself. I think it's gonna be business as usual. On top of that, you know, there's just that much stuff still lying around in Jita that will pretty easily bridge that gap, I think. For pyrite, we try to go back down towards 3.5 ISK, but the market is saying no, actually saying no on an investment spurt here. A little bit of a volume increase on that decreased price, meaning that people have jumped to the chance to actually grab some of those cheaper pyrite available, and then brought the price back to just below 4 ISK. Apparently 393 for the sellers, 383 for the buyers. 2 billion here, 1 billion here. It is still a decent amount of volumes, but looks like pyrite, yep, is being supported by the market at the current price, which is not the 1 year low price. At least that's good news, I would say. Next up we have Mexalon continuing to seesaw its way down, unfortunately, but it is still, from the former HiSec minerals, I would call them, the best performing one, I think, especially historically speaking. 57.57 ISK for the first seller, and buyers are coming in at 56 ISK. Volume wise, this is starting to look not that unreasonable. 275 million, 680 million. Sure, these are big, but the rest of them are actually pretty reasonable, and thus the market is hesitating. We're sometimes playing with 1 year low points of 55 ISK, but whenever we reach those, I do see volume increases as well, bring the price back up a little bit. So I would say it is looking strongly like people are taking their positions in the mineral market at the moment, which I can't blame you for. If right now you're managing to sell your plex, your training certificates, your injectors and things like that at record prices, well, you're gonna look for a market that is generally very depressed. It's a bit of a gamble, I would say. You do need something to happen in nullsec, or you do need CCP to go after Rorcal, which hints have dropped here and there, nothing concrete ever, but then that would make a lot of sense, of course, because these two charts are basically, these two segments are basically the opposite of each other. All ISK has flown out of the minerals and has basically flown into the plex stuff, and as a result, well, the savvy investors, or maybe the investors that want to play on fundamentals, are now buying minerals, and you can see that on the volumes increases when the prices reaches 1 year low points. For Isogen, we actually do have a decrease, but we did manage to basically steadily go up a little bit over 3 months or so. We stopped once we reached February. We were basically flat at around 17, and now we are back down a bit, unfortunately, at 17 ISK for the sellers, 15.72 for the buyers. So that's a bit of a margin opening up, and I think the culprit was this here. Volume increases don't always mean increased interest, of course. If the price starts to decline, this is in all likeliness lots of supply coming in, trying to sell at, well, that highest point that we've seen in 4 months, so that is also kind of normal. Next up, we have Noxium, trying to hold on to that 300 ISK mark here at the tail end. I think we are failing, but doing very well over the year. This is actually the best performing mineral when you look at it from a 1 year perspective. Historically speaking, still Noxium not great at all, but definitely one of the contenders right now for a more stable mining income. 301 still for the sellers and 292 for the buyers. Volume wise, you see that you get decreased price to 289, and then you get some increased volumes, bring the price back up. We're on our way back down on lower volumes, but if we break that 300 ISK on the seller side, I do think that we'll see people jump on the chance again. Next up, we have Zytrine continuing the slow decline towards 500 ISK here, 507 for the sellers and 481 for the buyers. That's a reasonable margin. Selling wise, you can still see the supplies are quite constant, and 89, and then we get 13, so that's a day ago. Then we get 86, then we get 85, then we get 84, 82. So you can see this is just a constant trickle of hundreds of thousands to a couple million of these that come to the market. Of course, someone said in the comments that that's not how they mine. They mine in vast volumes. They've got some of these moons coming out on the largest cycle every single day. Well, of course, you have people with vast operations like that, but I think that there's also lots of smallish groups that have 1 or 2 moons, and that just, you know, grab those every week or every 2 weeks and bring that to the market. You have bigger volumes available as well, of course, from bigger entities in all likeliness. Next up, we've got Megasite, that's also basically landing at 500 ISK and actually counter to Zytrine, which is continuing its decline, and I would suspect it might go through the 500 ISK barrier. Megasite is trying to hold on to that and has done so for the last week or so. Sellers are still at 514 ISK, almost 515, and the buyers are at 481. Volumes seem to be a bit lower as well than for Zytrine, so I personally do expect us to go back to a normalcy, which is that Megasite should be priced a bit higher than Zytrine. We had a bit of a reverse of that on the sharper decline, I would say, or no, the lower spike from Megasite that tried to reach 600 but then really hesitated, and Zytrine basically spiked up to that 600 mark and even managed to a day above that, which is the reverse of what you would expect. Megasite ought to be rarer than Zytrine, and I think both of these should be pretty easy to transport. And then finally we have a Morphite that is, you know, holding on to that 1 year low point here. So I think decent ISK could flow in that as well, and we are seeing that whenever we have data points here at 7,700 here. Massive increase in volumes. I'm not even sure if that's an investment, but here I would say yes. A quantity increased 3 times the normal amount, but you can see where the 5-day moving average really went to that low point, and we had a data point at 7,400 ISK. I think that some investors did make a move on that one. 7,800 pretty much for the sellers, 7,368 for the buyers. You can see the lack of demand in this as well, and so if supplies keep trickling in, or if demand stays low enough, then we will eventually push these sellers back to really low prices, and that's when we have this pattern of increased volumes, people taking their positions. Lots of, I think it makes lots of sense if you look at where the plex stuff is at and where the minerals are at, that money is starting to flow into minerals at the right times for those investors. Next up we have the PI materials coming in at 15.10, let's say. Like that, and here we have that mixed picture. I would say we have lots of non-fuel related PI materials that tend to be below average, but we have the fuel related PI materials that tend to be at 1 year high point. So the broadcast nodes managed to crawl their way back to 2.1 million ISK, but you can see that we spent quite a bit of time at around 2 million ISK as well, which is well below average. You could even say that in the first half of the year or so, 2.2 million would have been a normal average for broadcast nodes. So 2.1 million, a bit above that for the sellers, less than 2 million basically for the buyers, and you can see the lack of buyers here at the moment as well. So still, I would say below average prices for broadcast nodes, despite the smallish comeback here in the last couple of weeks. Construction blocks is staying above 11,000 ISK now for this week, currently selling for 11,300 ISK, buyers at 10,600. But still, if we look at this entire chart, I think we are trying to get back to an average price, but we're still a bit below that, especially if we keep the buyers in mind as well. Consumer electronics managed to get to 14,000 ISK, but look at the first half of the year again, that's just about the average and already has to pay the price for that. Nobody's buying at these prices, and thus they decrease. 13,000 for the sellers, 12,165, mostly 12,000 actually, and then 11,000. Actually, yeah, that's interesting. One buyer 12,165, another one have 12,000, and then it's 11,000. So here again, showing that lack of demand in these non-fuel related PI materials. You can drive the price up a little bit from time to time, but then the volumes just completely dry up and the price has to come back down as well. For coolants, we are still at that 1 year high point. Look at that, staying around 15,000 ISK. Sellers coming in at 15,400, buyers at 13,355. That's the exact opposite, of course, well above average, 1 year high point. Lots of ISK flowing into the coolant market at the moment. And so in the general vibe, we have obviously high points for plex stuff, low points for minerals. PI has that mixed picture where I would say it is, generally speaking, on its average normal flows of ISK in the PI market, but it is clearly divided between fuel-related PI materials like enriched uranium, which is now also making its way to another 1 year high point. Sellers are coming in at 16,000 ISK, buyers at 14,600 ISK as well. And then we have to take one look though at that same pattern for the volumes. You can clearly see that at these high prices, volumes are decreasing for enriched uranium. Coolants, well, last couple of days also seriously decreasing, which may mean another top. So if you still have some of these, then I think the time to sell would be now. Integrity response drones though, that is the slow and agonizing decline and staying in a well below average price at the moment, selling for 2.3 million, buyers at 2.2 million. But you know, normally you'd get more than 2.5 million for those. Mechanical parts, yep, fuel related. Look at that pattern showing up here, bouncing up to 14,000 ISK. 13,800 for the sellers, 13,400 for the buyers. But be wary of the volumes at this point, I would say. If that starts to substantially stay lower, then I do think that we will start to see a top here as well, and potentially the decline can be quite serious. We have been in this situation, if you look at coolants for instance, for quite a while, and as a result I do think lots of people will have switched their production, and as a result we may get in oversupply faster than we think. Nuclear reactors manages to crawl its way back to more than 100,000 ISK. So sellers coming in at 103,000 ISK, 104 for most, and 86,000 still for the buyers, showing that lack of actual demand in non-fuel related PI materials. Again, you can see that the volumes basically can dry up to zero on days as well. Organic mortar applicators tries to come back to 1.1 million, which is its average. We have to be honest here, 1.1 million for the sellers, 1 million for the buyers. But again, look at the demand bar here. The buyers are just not showing up in JITA. Now, there may be more of them outside of JITA, and there are, and they go up to 1.1 million. And actually in decent volumes as well for organic mortar applicators. So this is something to keep in mind as well. It may look like you're gonna get an easy time grabbing organic mortar applicators at 1 million ISK, and I personally think you can do that because there will be people that just, you know, go to JITA 4.4 and sell their stuff here, not looking at the other market. But keep in mind that you will be in competition with the player-owned trade hubs around you that are trying to buy for 1.1 million. And they usually put them up at one jump, and so the first sales do tend to go to them. And that is just not that easy to always grab something at the buy price of JITA 4.4, and especially here in these organic mortar applications. Now I'll have to take a quick look at, let's see if I can find a chart that is pretty low. There was one, yeah, integrity response drones, for instance, crashing down and consistently going lower. And then if we look at the other stations here, competition is basically right on the same price as JITA 4.4. So that's the way this takes shape. I think that JITA 4.4 tends to sometimes get lazy, or there just isn't a lot of demand, and then JITA 4.4 starts to really lag behind the player-owned trade hubs, which are still bidding the price up to 1.1 million, for instance, for organic mortar applicators. So we do expect buyers here to start to come in and compete with those prices as well. Next up, we have the robotics that is staying at a slightly less than average price for the year, but still doing quite okay. I would say 100,000 ISK for the sellers, 95,000 ISK for the buyers. Feels like a much more normal situation with decent demand and decent supply as well. Look at the volumes, quite steady, and maybe even a little bit above average for the year. Self-harmonizing power cores though, back to that below average price, playing with 2 million ISK, 2.05 million for the sellers and 1.9 million for one buyer in JITA. So here, player-owned trade hubs will be interesting. They're driving the price up to almost 2 million, but it's not that far away from the first buyer of JITA, and that's exactly the pattern that I was talking about. If we disregard this one buy order, that's the most recent one, then you can see a lack of demand again, price 1.8 million, below 1.9 million. But yeah, people then start to take positions around JITA itself, and as a result we have that one fresh buy order that jumps up a little bit in price, which is going to drag other buyers up here as well, I think. So keep that in mind when you're looking to invest, especially in these PI materials. You are competing with the trade hubs around JITA as well. Next up, we have the superconductors. 12,000 ISK, trying to get back below that. Sellers coming in at 12,000, buyers at 11,400, and the average does seem to be, well, close to 12,000. On some days we are below average, on other days we are on the average. Test cultures next, same pattern here, landing at 8,000 ISK, 8,200 for the sellers, 7,700 for the buyers in JITA. But I think if we go for, well, actually no, look at that, player-owned trade hubs buying at that same price again. The competition though, 0.20, 0.21, 0.22, that's where it happens, and that is of course again showing that reality. Finally, we have the wetware mainframes trying to get back to 2.25 million after reaching a one-year low point of around 2.1 million. So 2.3 for the sellers, 2.2 for the buyers. And again, you have that jump up here. So you can expect player-owned trade hubs to be around that 2.1 million as well. PI, very interesting, I would say, especially I couldn't tell you why coolants, for instance, is now jumping up to 15k, and a mechanical part is following suit, one-year high point just like that on, well, I would say quite a volatile spurt up here at the end. So kind of a weird situation. If you have more information, definitely feel free to post that in the comments. But we're moving on to the advanced moon materials at 24 minutes, let's say. Let's make it easy and just take around 24 minutes and get started. Here is crystalline carbonite, basically again flat at a less than average price, but nowhere near a buy opportunity. We're gonna go over these pretty quickly at this point, except when they look interesting, like Ferrite Carbide breaking through the 150 barrier. Very, very interesting. 145.55 for the first buyer, but 138.32 for the buyers. In the that's 5 jumps out, so nobody's really competing outside of Jita here. Yep, Ferrite Carbide. You could buy this for less than 140 ISK, which is below the entire chart. That does look interesting as an investment opportunity, in my opinion. Definitely something to look into. Quick look at my tickers. Do I have any of that just yet? Nope. Definitely a possibility. Next up, we have titanium carbide, also dipping down, but we can see that we could go lower. This has quite a bit of momentum, but is basically stalled at around 170, 173 for the sellers, 167 for the buyers. Massive volumes, 30 million, 20 million, 4 million here. Buyers coming in with the 2 to 4 million pieces as well. So I think we're basically, unfortunately, stabilizing at that less than average price, but nowhere near the bottom. And then for tungsten carbide, we did reach very close to that 175. And I think a couple of weeks ago I said, well, maybe tungsten carbide, I mean, it had some momentum to go down here, and it is starting to play with those low points as well. And I think as a result here, we have a volume increase. Thus people took their positions, and we are back to that less than average, but not close to a bottom price here. 207 for the sellers, 202 for the buyers. That's a no. So far Ferrite Carbide, very clear 1 year low point on that one. The others, some of them are down a bit, but not where I would make the jump. Next up, the metamaterials, photonic metamaterials, staying very low, and give it another month or so and we are at trading at that 1 year low point. But you can also see, if we show the charts up a little bit here, that we basically recovered in price a touch as well. 17,540 for the sellers, 15,100 for the buyers. It does show lack of buyers. 15,100 on the chart is around, whoops, let's draw the around here on the chart, which is very, very low. But I personally feel like we should have the patience and wait for the chart to really break down before we make a jump on this one. Plasmonic metamaterials is starting to show that pattern though. That is interesting. Look at that, going below 19,000 ISK. Previous bottom 18,000 ISK, and now we're basically landing at 18,300. We also have a pretty big volume spike here all of a sudden. 18,300 for the sellers, 18,000 for the buyers. So you are basically buying in this, god damn it, in this range right here. You could try, I think, here. Try to compete with the buyers. Quick look outside of Jita. Nope, it's still the same. So you could buy super close to 18,000 ISK. And if you look at this entire chart, I think that this is not a bad place to do so. Kind of a weird volume spike here though. Is that more supply that has driven the sellers down to that 18,300 mark? It is possible, which makes it just that the more likely for you to grab them close to 18,000 ISK. So it's a possibility. If this is indeed supply, then this is a nice time, I think, to try and grab some. Next up, the non-linear metamaterials. That one not close to a bottom, I don't think. Buyers are still at 23,000 ISK. That's a bit too early for me. And then we have the terahertz metamaterials. That's actually surging back up to a slightly above average price, 27,500 ISK on the chart. 27,200 for the sellers, 26,000 for the buyers. Slight sell opportunity on the terahertz metamaterials, I think, if you bought at the right time, of course. Then we have the other advanced move materials. Let's see if we can spot some patterns here. The seesaw for fermionic condensates that has started in December is continuing its upward trend and staying below 100,000 ISK, so 98,000 for the sellers, 96,000 for the buyers. You can see a lack of margin, and you can see that this is a touch below average, but you could call 100,000 ISK close to the average for fermionic condensates. For ferrogel, we have another recovery up to 50k, which, well, if we take this as one half, this as the other half, is getting close to that average again, maybe a touch below that. 50,000 sorry, for the sellers, 47,000 for the buyers. a bit below average, but not by much anymore. Fuller rides, after getting very close to that 900 bottom, makes its way back up a little bit. Currently selling for above 1000 discs, buyers at 981. So that is slight resurgence after, well, it has to be said, a month of down trends with 930 at the low point. And I think we will have some investors that will have taken their positions in fuller rights on that, considering the volumes here. Hypersynaptic fibers landing at 11,000 disc. I again don't really like it that much because of what we saw a year ago when we went close to 10,000 disc, but the buyers are below 11,000 disc, and that is actually perhaps a pretty nice opportunity if you try and make a bit more waves and show a little bit more of what's happening. Then buyers are below 11,000 disc, and as a result, if you manage to grab these, you are below 90% of the charts. Nano transmitters next. Also a bit under pressure on this one. Average price 5,500 disc, so we're still below that. Buyers coming in at 4,800 disc. Maybe we should wait for 4,500 on that one. Phenolic composites did reach that low point at 2000 disc and stayed there for about a month flat. That doesn't last forever, so we're back at 2200, a jump of 10% pretty much. 2185 for the sellers, 2121 for the buyers, so a lack of margin. Basically the market has been forced up almost 10% here. Not really on massive volumes. Actually, volumes are still declining, so will this last? Well, I think it may not. Ceramic fibers next. You can see a bottom of 400, back at 450, so it's that same pattern, less than average, but not in the best place to try and buy it. So that's it for the advanced smooth materials. We can move up to the Tech 2 ships pretty quickly to at 31 minutes. Okay, not bad. Let's take a look at those now. Burn Jita is, I think, the action in New Eden right now, and that doesn't really involve lots of Tech 2 ships. So as a result, I don't think we'll see many moves. So the Ares flat at 27.5 million. Not a lot of demand. Buyers coming in at 26 million, the first one at least. And then trade hubs, yeah, there is some competition for Tech 2 ships in the player-owned trade hubs as well. Something to keep in mind, at least this is the case for this first frigate. Let's take a look at the Basilisk nest. The Basilisk had a very nice pattern here. Look at that. Could have bought these for 220, sold them for 300, back down to 210, sold them for 300, back down now to 220. So sellers are coming in at 223 million disc, buyers at 209. Lack of buyers pretty obvious in Jita 4.4. What's it like around Jita? Well, 209 as well. So basically that competition is on. Bit more buyers on the market if you look at it this way, of course, but the volumes here 1, 3, 1. Well, it's the reasonable volumes. It's the same thing I would try to do as well. Try to grab a Basilisk for less than 210 million. Don't try to buy a dozen of them. 1 to 3 makes lots of sense. Wait for that other next spike, then you get a nice opportunity, I would say. Cerberus next, staying above 250 million ISK on this one, so 260 for the sellers, 245 for the buyers. Not much to say. The Crow finally recovering, so that investment opportunity is over. I think I did call it last week. That was the time to jump in. 26 million on average. Now it's up to 34 million. You can do a Twitch trade if you want to. I think it's going to be easy to sell 1 or 2, but a dozen or so probably not so, because the buyers are stuck at 27.5 million. So forced up a bit, but not by too much just yet. Next up, we have the Guardian, that is also dropping after a nice spike up to 300 million ISK, back to less than 230 on the chart, selling for 222, and in Jita nobody is buying that, so we should definitely, I think, maybe start opening this up on the buyer front for maybe also on the seller front. Let's take a look at that. No, that's still Jita 4.4 all the way. So the buyers are at 207 million ISK. 0.5 I should say, and then 223 for the buyers. Let's see if we can get 210 to show up here. 210 is right here, and so you're buying below that. Yeah, the Guardian, just like the Basilisk, very interesting on its volatility, and back close to a buy opportunity. Next up we have the Heretic. Definitely below average, I would say. Are you buying these for less than 60 million ISK? Actually, yes, this one is not competing in GTA 4.4. So in GTA, you can grab Heretics for less than 60 million ISK. Yeah, look for those investments. If you look for those investments, I think that makes a lot of sense. The Hound is back up all of a sudden on volume increases, broke through 30 million ISK, 31.8 million for the sellers, 28 million still for the buyers. So this must have been a big purchase or something like that. A small sell opportunity. I personally am going to wait for an actual big spike before I sell mine. The Ishtar gets back to less than 250, 245 for the sellers, 235 for the buyers. Basically pretty cheap at the moment, less than average. The Manticore jumps up to 35 million. So Stealth Bombers back in vogue all of a sudden. 34 million for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. And if I'm not mistaken, I bought some Manticores at 28 million. I could make a small trade of this. I personally am going to wait for a better opportunity. Then we've got the Munin that is landing at a 1-year low point, selling for 224 bars, coming in at 213 million ISK, which is very cheap for the Munin at the moment. Definitely one where you could take your positions as well. The Nemesis next, staying above 25 million, but 26 for the sellers, 25 million for the buyers. That's definitely pretty cheap as well. And Stealth Bombers, well, you can see what happens to the other ones. So even on medium sized conflicts, I would say that you will have Stealth Bomber fleets that need to be replaced in short order. As a result, perhaps the Nemesis is still interesting. The Oneros is dropping back to less than 200 million ISK, 199 for the sellers, 191 for a couple of the buyers. So that is less than average, I would say, but not by too much. The Purifier also a bit of a weird data point at 33 million all of a sudden. Yep, 33 million for the sellers, 28 million for the buyers. They are not budging just yet, and I think they're right to do so in the current vibe. But overall, yeah, slight sell opportunities in the Stealth Bombers, showing some volatility coming back. And so you have that same pattern here in the Logistics Cruisers, quite a bit of volatility. And now if you look at the Stealth Bombers, we're also seeing a bit of volatility rear its head here. The Saber is not doing a great, selling for 68 million bars, coming at 65 million. Definitely one that you can take a position on as well. I wouldn't buy 100 Sabers, 1 or 2, I think. Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Scimitar, let's take a look at you. 1-year low point again, less than 200 million, 204 for the sellers, 195.6 for the buyers. You could, but you've been able to try and buy these for a couple of weeks now. And then we've got the Stiletto that is still at 30 million ISK, 29.7 for the sellers, 27.6 for the buyers. Definitely the least interesting interceptor in the last couple of months. At least for the Ares, for instance, we have that low point. For the Crow, we had a pronounced 1-year low point as well. So the Stiletto, yeah, pretty flat at 30 million. Quite weird that it can stay so at decent volumes. Must be a pretty good one, basically. Next up, we have the Tech 3 ships coming in at 3730. Like that. Let's take a look at the pattern here. What I'm mostly looking for is oversupply signs. Honestly, we're just not seeing the big wars at the moment. The prices are, I would say, normal, and we've generally been in a well-supplied market in the last couple of months. So the Confessor staying below 40 million ISK, 39.3 for the sellers, 37.1 for the buyers. Looks quite okay. One thing to note here again, 122 for the sellers a couple of days ago, 43 here less than 24 hours ago, and you've got 13, 12, 26, 18 here again. It's up a little bit from the last couple of months for sure in the Confessor. It doesn't have a big impact on the price just yet, but it's something to note, I think. For the Heckgate, we have a bit of a spike up to 50 million, but you could see here again that same pattern. 40 million in the last couple of months was definitely possible. 40.4 million for the sellers, 37.3 for the buyers, 43, 28, 23. This is basically the same, still well supplied, but nothing crazy at all. The Jackdaw, back up to 45 million ISK. Must be a bit more interest in the Jackdaw. 46 million for the sellers, 45 million for the buyers. And what surprises me here is, sure, you've got 50 and 50, but you've got nothing crazy here either for the best-selling tactical destroyer at the moment. So I would that to me is one indication that there is not that much extra production just ready to go at any time to switch to the best possible seller, because, well, we've got this very slow response, almost non-existent response to these better prices in the Jackdaw for now. And then finally we have the Zweepel, which is the least interesting one, managed to get back to 37.5 on the chart. So we're talking 38 million for the sellers, 32.8 million for the buyers. We do have 101 of them here, but it's 71 days ago. So I would say that this week, yet again, I think we are in the holding pattern. We've got the average prices around 40 million for the tactical destroyers. The Jackdaw is actually doing surprisingly well at 46 million. You can definitely put that one to and above average price. And we're not really seeing signs that supply is ramping up or something like that. You're even seeing basically a lack of mobility at the moment, because the Jackdaw is staying at this highest price for tactical destroyer, and supply is still staying in the confessor. It's just not moving to these opportunities just yet. So weird spot, definitely something to keep an eye out for. Next up we have the cruisers. Here is the Legion, bit of pressure in the last 2 weeks or so. 184 million for the sellers, 174 for the buyers, which is, you know, an okay price I would say, but we're mostly interested, I think, in the volumes here. 281 of 30, but this again feels far from oversupplied. Next up we have the Loki, actually up a bit for the week. This one currently selling for 238 million ISK, buyers at 220. And again, look at that, you could almost say that we are lacking in supply. If you'd get 20s and things like that, I think you'd get a more stable price like here in January. So this is another sign that there's not that much production. The Proteus, a bit less popular than most of them. This one does manage a couple of pretty flat months. 170, 1 for the sellers, 160 for the buyers. Here again 15, 10, nothing that jumps out, so definitely not oversupplied. And then finally we have the Tengu, which ought to be a bit more popular. 100 a day, flat at around 180, 181 million for the sellers, 170 for the buyers. But again, the volumes here is far from crazy. This is actually feeling like it could become too little very quickly. On just a little bit of demand, let's say a couple dozen Tengus, we are driving the price up to 190 million all of a sudden. Same thing with the Legion. Sure, there's the 30 here, but get through that, well, it's ones, it's lots of ones, and you can get to the 190 pretty easily as well. The Proteus is probably a little bit of a weirder spot because of its lack of interest, its lack of meta at the moment, but generally speaking, the cruisers, I would say the exact opposite. No signs whatsoever of oversupply. In fact, the possibility of spikes exist on big purchases from alliances. So very strange. I thought we'd be seeing more supply coming by now, considering the last couple of months, but it's not materializing. And then for the extra product in line with Burn Jita, of course, we'll take a look and see if there's an impact on the destroyer market at 42.30, let's say. Like that. So it's going to be Tech 1 destroyers, so we get ships. Then we have destroyers, not advanced, not precursor, but standard destroyers. So let's take a look here. The Courser ought to know a little bit of a spike because the Imperium is flying those as well. Average price around 1 million, currently selling for around 1 million, buyers at 900,000. So that's actually a no. It's a bit of an uptick, but it's not pretty major, which I think shows that the Imperium or the goons are well prepared. They have everything set up. They can resupply their fleets for as long as they need it. And there's very few people that basically are forced to purchase stuff from the market. This may even have been just some opportunity buying, since they were gonna do Burn Jita anyways. So they bought a few thousand Courser there in a couple of days when they were pretty low. For the Dragoon, what is happening here? Yeah, flat, and we can tell here from the Tech 1 market and the mineral market, flat below average, very cheap Dragoons at the moment. 930 4,000 for the sellers, 770 for the buyers. Not great. The Corax, that one is slightly up, but again trading well below average. The Cormorant is in the same pattern. Normally you'd buy these for 1 million ISK. Currently you're buying them for 784,000 ISK. We get the Algos, not much to say here again, very, very low point. This is basically the impact of the mineral prices on the Tech 1 market that's showing up here, straight down for 1 year from 1.4 million to 900,000 ISK. The Catalyst, we do have a volume spike, but the price is just not moving. Let's see the average here, 840,000 ISK, selling for 910,000 ISK, so a slight uptick in price, and the buyers are still at 810. Typical gang ships, Catalyst and Courser. The Courser most popular, so that one moved at least a little bit. Then we've got the Tal War, yeah, that's basically flat, also not great. And then we've got the Thrasher, very much a pattern in a more popular destroyer as well, from 1.2 million and now selling for 718,000. So I personally thought we would see a bit more of a move on these destroyers, but it shows that yeah, basically Burn Jita is now a well reversed and well prepared event where the Imperium must have people that basically have all the logistics down, and as a result we hardly see an actual move on the market. I also don't think that the event will last long enough to like choke out certain markets in GTA 4.4. It's just too big to do that in short order. It would need a lot more than that, but it's an interesting event, and it's definitely fun to see some of these freighters get blown up. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this Eve Talk then, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Oh, for those that are still here, oh sorry, there was definitely a request for me to mention something in Eve Talk, and I think it's an important one for the market indeed. CCP is going to nerf basically potential alpha clone income by restricting level 4 and level 5 missions to Omega clones. This might definitely have an impact on ISK supplies, ISK creation in the game. It's a bit of information that might be helpful in Eve Talk as well. So if you're still around here, then at this point, then you're getting this information as well. I should have mentioned it earlier in the video right at the start, but I completely forgot about it. And that is going to be it for this Eve Talk. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.